Welcome back. Former Vice President Joe Biden called for Democratic unity in South Carolina over the weekend after a week in which several of his Democratic presidential rivals demanded an apology for remarks he made about working with segregationist senators. This weekend, the majority of Democrats stood shoulder to shoulder, literally and figuratively, as they converged on South Carolina for Congressman Jim Clyburn's world-famous fish fry and also the state Democratic Party convention. Pete Buttigieg, however, skipped the fish fry. He wanted to be home in South Bend following a deadly police shooting of a black man by a white police officer last week. He did speak to voters in South Carolina on Saturday, but back in South Bend on Sunday, a town hall there got heated as residents demanded answers and action in the wake of that shooting.
Get the racists off the streets. It's disrespectful that I wake up every day scared. It's disrespectful that I have 3 boys that I have to teach today what to do.
And with me now is the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation right here on MSNBC. He interviewed Joe Biden this weekend. He's also been in touch frequently with Pete Buttigieg during the campaign. Reverend, thank you for joining us. Well, let me start on this question of how Buttigieg back in South Bend is handling this incident. You can see clearly a ton of emotion in that room yesterday. The political context of this is we've been talking about Buttigieg doing well nationally, but struggling with black voters in particular. How do you think he's handling this situation in South Bend?
I think it's a very tense situation. I've talked to the widow of the man that was killed. And what has increased the tension is the fact that the police officer that shot and killed this man had a body camera on that was turned off. And I told Mayor Buttigieg when he called me that the first thing they must deal with is find out why that camera was turned off and hold someone accountable for that. The purpose of having body cameras, which we all were part of that movement to try and make that something that was required, was to have transparency. If you're going to allow policemen to turn off cameras, as we've seen now in several incidents, then it mocks the whole idea of a body camera. And he needs to have action on the body camera. He needs to have action on the disproportionate amount of whites on a police force that does not reflect the population there. So I think that he has a moment now where he could either set a national model by taking action based on what the people there in the black community in South Bend are saying, or he could end up in a worsening position. One of the things that's ironic about this is the people that are facing these questions of race is Joe Biden and Buttigieg. Buttigieg, the youngest one on the ticket, and Joe Biden next to the oldest. So it's not a generational problem. It is a problem that we have got to deal with the issue of race and quit copping out that it's Joe Biden because he's old or somebody else because they're young. It is a problem that we've got to face, and I think it is dead center as we go in these debates this week.
Well, I want to ask you about Biden, but one more on Buttigieg, because I think this is something that a lot of people have been trying to figure out. I've noted it on these shows a lot. When you look at the polling, I can see Buttigieg hitting double digits, sometimes with white voters, more specifically white college-educated voters when you start breaking it down that way. But just poll after poll, and it includes a poll I saw in Indiana a couple months ago, he's barely registering, if he's registering at all, with black voters. There was an interview, Marcia Fudge, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, she told the Daily Beast, she said, quote, Pete has a black problem. And from that article, a prominent black leader who requested anonymity was not only referring to young supporters, but expressing a sentiment that was apparent in talks with several African-American lawmakers that Buttigieg's interactions with the black community in recent weeks were naive and that the national perception of him as genuine and authentic was not always translating when it came to their concerns. That was the explanation offered in this article. I'm curious, when you see those poll numbers, what's your explanation for it? What's your sense of it?
My explanation is that I think a lot of progressives assume that they do not have to reach out and deal with the race gap as they have dealt with the wealth gap and other issues, which is why we've seen any number of progressive candidates holding huge rallies with very few blacks coming and dealing with various issues where they can sit around some of their friends that are black, but that are not really addressing the problems of the criminal justice system, mass incarceration, police brutality, as well as economic disparities in the black community that goes across all lines. And I think that the Buttigieg problem there is only reflective of a larger problem of the divide that I think is not intentional, but they've not come to terms with, of some of the progressive political leadership. And that is, you cannot assume just because you're not as bad as others that you're still relating to the pain and the problems of people on the street in everyday life as a black American.
You mentioned the idea of a generational component to some of this. In terms of Biden, that's what I wanted to ask you about. If there is a generational divide among black voters in the black electorate, because we see this in polling where older black voters a lot more likely to support Biden than younger. And then on this controversy over his remarks last week, it seemed notable to me. Jim Clyburn, in his late 70s, came out, defended Biden. John Lewis, same generation, same age, a similar sort of era that he came of age in, defending Biden as well. Is there a generational component within sort of the black political world on this?
I think that that's too simplistic. I think that there's a divide in those that have made the effort of trying to push for certain accountability and those that haven't. Because Joe Biden has on his staff people that are of a younger generation. Cedric Richmond, who has certainly been a very effective and respected chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, is the vice chair. His campaign is standing with him. Simone Sanders, who came out of activism, is not even 30 years old. So I think it's simplistic to make it generational. It is those that have always pressed and believed in pressing, and those that feel that you can deal with other people and deal with it in a different way. And that's always been, that had nothing to do with generation, it has something to do with approach. And John Lewis and others are 15 years older than me. I respect their approach. They respect mine. I respect younger people's approach. It's all about trying to get to the same place. I think that what was striking to me is that the vice president, former vice president, did not understand, as I was talking to him, the sensitivity of some of the words he said. I don't think his intention was bad, but his wording, I think he should have owned and apologized that could have been very hurtful. It certainly hurt people like me to hear the son boy kind of statement.
We are running short on time, but I wanted to just ask you about that. That's a very interesting thing you said. Do you think there is lasting damage to Joe Biden among black voters because of this?
I think it's what he does with it from here. If he owns it, if he says, I've been out here for decades, I may sometimes say things that are mistaken what I mean, and if I did, I apologize for any harm, and moves on. But I think the more he looks like he denies the sensitivity, he makes it something that could last longer than it should have from his perspective. But many of us are not going to let go of the fact that when we are wounded by words, we're going to say we're wounded by words. They matter to us. We've been called boy for generations, and our signals go up when we hear that term. And that should not be something that we pass over for anyone, old friends or new friends, whether they're in South Bend or whether they are someone that we've known for decades.
All right, Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.